Tell me about your early influences as architects. I mean, what kind of formed your ideas, your aspirations?
I wish I could say we were that organised. I know we liked landscape. We took classes in the forestry school in Australia. I know we were interested in people because we did stuff in the planning department. Nobody else was doing that. Architecturally.
Well, your work has a strong sort of sense of social responsibility. How did that develop?
Oh, I think that comes directly from growing up in Melbourne, Australia, where there was, I think, more emphasis in social responsibility, maybe across the board and also in architecture. So there were wonderful projects being done, for instance, by the Housing Commission, and it actually got better after we left because they were really hiring young architects to do really interesting infill housing projects.
I don't think we realised that we were doing anything that altruistic. There seemed to be design opportunity in socially responsible work. And when we came here, we didn't realise it was something that was so unusual.
It just seemed to be something that you would do.
Why not?
And it seemed that at the time when we first started getting into affordable housing, there didn't seem to be, this was in the 80s, and not a lot of architects were sort of interested in that because they didn't see it as an opportunity for doing something interesting architecturally. And to us, it didn't seem like it, that this was not a venue for doing something of architectural interest.
You didn't see a conflict between
there was no conflict
between the aesthetics and the social responsibility?
Not really, because just because you're doing housing for people with marginal means doesn't mean that they don't deserve to live in something that could be interesting. I mean, the thing we like to do on all our projects, we always ask ourselves is, and subconsciously, we don't, but if we were in that situation, if I was somebody on Skid Row and had to live in a Skid Row hotel, what would I like it to be like, And so...
In that case, we chose a pensiona. If you were in Italy and there was something personal about it, and that it had a sort of a little bit of hotel, in a boutique hotel kind of appearance, because that would be a nice place or way to live. And I think we're probably income blind in terms of client. I think everybody wants the same things. Maybe they want more of something. But in terms of an experience or an aesthetic, I don't believe that people are that different. You may connect with somebody or another, but that doesn't mean they will have more or less money because, to spend on their lives.
But one of the problems, in a way, in doing affordable housing, or is that you are not dealing directly with the clients, with the people who are actually going to live there. You're dealing with bureaucracy.
That's true, and so then you are dealing with bureaucracy, but you project you say, well, okay, then I'm not dealing with them, but
So you have to become your own client.
You become your own client. You project that. Right?
I think that's part of the problem with a lot of the housing we're seeing in the States is it's not personal, and I guess the key to designing stuff for people who don't really have a say is to make it personal for you. At least you've designed for someone real that's human. It's not just, well, what's expedient. I think that's very important. But when we started,
and you have to make that case to the bureaucracy.
Well, the actual clients actually are quite understanding. The way that it works here is usually non-profit providers or the people who hire us, cities who are looking to do community centres or recreation centres. They're not in the way. It's the regulatory framework that's in the way, and it's the budget that's in the way, and it's the idea that you shouldn't appear to be spending too much money on things that are meant to be, that are not, you don't want it to look like you provided a luxury, you're meant to be providing a necessity.
But you also do go and observe. You do a low-income housing project, you don't do it in isolation. You go and see are the projects that maybe that have been done, and you go, well, gee, wouldn't it be better if it had this, or gee, that's a great thing that they've got there. And so you do that. Don't forget you're talking about people who are renting, so there's no point talking to one group because they may have particular desires or wishes, and they move on at somebody else. So you are designing something, and you're designing for a group of people who are going to come and go, and you just have to make those projections. And architects, as architects, we're trained to do that. Hopefully, that we can look at something and say, gee, that's great, or that's not great. We could do better. And I think one of the things that was happening is that step was at that time, I think, missing. And what was missing was the big part was how do I make it
Los
more,
Angeles, you mean?
Yeah, how do you make it more interesting? How do I make that interesting architecturally so it's it's just not as boring? I mean, it's got all the amenities and everything, but you've added a little bit extra. We always have this thing that if you give the client exactly what they expect, they'll never be surprised. And so you haven't done your job. So going down a list and checking off all the boxes and saying, okay, I've done that. Well, to us, that's not enough. I mean, we can do something more than that and have something that's a beautiful surprise. It can be as simple as having beautiful lighting. It can be, or just a beautiful composition in the building. Or it could be that it's a modern building where everybody else is doing these sort of, at that time they were doing very sort of postmodern things.
But there are two things in that too. The postmodern part, what was wonderful about early postmodernism when we were training, was people like Charles Moore and Venturi were trying to find a connection with popular culture. Where it ended up is very disappointing because it became conventionalized. And but the lessons of connecting with culture that architects are somehow, and they're doing it all over again, distancing themselves from the rest of the population is a problem. And I've always been interested in how you cross over those two camps or points of view. Most of you can't speak to your parents about architecture if you're in the design profession. They don't understand what you're doing. And how do you bridge that gap somehow?
But much of what passes for popular culture is actually commercially manufactured.
Right.
Like strip malls and the stuff you see around. That's Burger Kings and McDonald's are. These are commercial products. I mean, what is popular culture?
I don't see. That's where I don't really have a problem with it. I'm a little bit I'm an acceptor of how cultures grow. I don't think that because it's ugly, it's bad, necessarily. The strip malls in LA, for example, were the most energetic infill projects that had happened in decades because there are a lot of little entrepreneurial businesses, often by immigrant families, and they had a vitality and a life that was pretty cool. Strange signage, not particularly nice buildings, but cool places to be because there was an energy level. And that kind of authenticity of living is something that really is interesting to us. To a certain extent, architecture is like conceptual art. You're setting up a relationship with the viewer. So it's a sort of, I've been trying to call it like some kind of democratic design. That how do you build a relationship with a viewer allows them various degrees of interaction. They can walk by nothing. They can choose to see a clue, and they build relationships. Because what's wonderful about conceptual art, it doesn't exist unless you want to build the framework for the story that's being told. It's words and images, but you've got to put them together, or it's an ordinary object displayed in a way that makes you think the ordinary object is different. And that, to me, is what we're kind of trying to do with what we do. The other aspect of the kind of humanity, I think, is I have a lot of trouble with authority. And you're equally bad, actually.
Is that a very Australian thing?
Well, yeah, I think culturally it's meant to be. Culturally it is. And so I don't like settings that feel like they're patronizing. I don't like settings where I feel like I'm meant to see a certain thing or be smart enough to understand a certain thing. And I think that influences the style of the work. So it's kind of lazy in its what it's projecting. It's not saying, okay, I know I'm architecture, look at me, I'm strong, you know it, you can tell. we're kind of working on the edge of where, is it architecture, isn't it architecture? And I don't know how it'll play out, but the investigation's fun.
It's always difficult to define what is just building and what is architecture. I
Yeah.
mean, definition is flexible and moves. But I'm interested to know what brought you to LA, given that you're really working in an alien context.
Well, it's like everything else we've done. We fell into it. You end up with a set of circumstances of your life. Other people make decisions, say, we're going to do this. We're not that brave. We just kind of fall into it. We hadn't done the big trip Australians do during their architectural training, so we figured we should do the big trip. So that was a decision. And then we thought we'd go to Europe, but there was a recession, so we didn't think we'd get work. So then we said, we'll go to the States, but you know what? We didn't understand the work permit stuff, that people just came here and worked illegally. We thought you had to do it, by the book. And so then we decided, we'd better enroll in a school because that's the only option of getting out for any length of time. So we went to school. Hank doesn't like the cold, so that limited the number of schools we could go to. So we ended up at UCLA.
So to some extent it was accidental. But having come here, what did the city offer you, or challenges? What was interesting about the city? Why did you stay?
Well,
I love this town.
I mean, the first 3 months I hated this town because it was just incomprehensible. It's just huge. You didn't know where all the nifty places were. It just, you ended up in Westwood, and that was pretty dull. But then after being here for a year, it was like fabulous. This is a fabulous town, just absolutely rife with opportunities for architects, because it's such an incredibly ugly town. Must be a lot of potential for architects here
It's got
to
some
solve all the problems, and the problems are interesting because you have the so-called city of the future that's dependent on cars, and how you reconcile the big desire for people to have pedestrian-friendly communities and cars, and the introduction of public transportation, which we're slowly starting to see. So it's just fabulous.
And it was on the verge of a new density boom, so that it's reshaping, it's going through its next iteration as a place. I mean, it's still funny, Raina Banham's description of LA still fits. It almost doesn't anymore, but it still fits. It's at the end of...
The four ecologies.
Yeah.
But, there's also a kind of openness about LA, receptive to new ideas.
There's that, but
no, it's not. That's not true. It's not receptive to new ideas. It just doesn't care. So that it's, in other words, there's more license. You can't operate in New York in the architectural community the way you can operate in the community here. You're very independent. And what's wonderful about LA is you call before you go somewhere. It's also its big weakness. There isn't that sense of sort of extended family community that happens for architects, but it's an incredible freedom.
Given your interest in sort of popular culture as a reference, this is the engine of popular culture, the world engine, a manufacturer of popular culture. That's an excitement in itself, isn't it?
Oh, I think it is, especially the immigration relative to popular culture. It's reinventing itself culturally all the time as each new immigrant group comes in. And all of a sudden, I remember 10 years ago when Monterey Park sprung up, all of a sudden, how many percent of from being basically a white Anglo-Saxon population, they were 70% Chinese over 4 years. And the stuff that brought, and I don't know, I like walking in a hardware store, the stuff that you found in the hardware store, in the supermarket in Monterey Park, the restaurants, you're sitting in a place and you're meant to be in LA, but you look around you and you're in a completely different
It's like being in
culture.
a different country.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
If you were given a project with an unlimited budget, a dream project, how would it change your aesthetic and the way you go about things?
We still have the same problem. We've been using budget as a compositional disciplining tool, having done so much of it. It's like, what do you really need? And I think any project, irrespective of the budget, needs that discipline. What would be wonderful is that sometimes what you come up with is some purity of intention that you see in some of the Japanese architecture. The people who can do a house all out of that polygal wall and just put containers inside it, and they have a client who'll go with it. To be able to have that sort of freedom to take an idea to its logical conclusion is what I'd love to do with the money. But it's not necessarily that I'd want to just spend more because I could. I would want to do more things.
I mean, we're kind of doing it in the Pittsburgh Children's Museum, where we've got this translucent structure, and we are actually using a polycarbonate material. And part of it is because, well, it's a lot cheaper, but we have to we're convincing the clients that not only that, because we could do it out of glass, but there's a certain tactile quality to this material. It's a plastic material, and it's kind of the same material that the Legos are made of, and it's just not as slick. So, and that's what we like, that quality about it. So we're saving that money to do other things, right? And so we can make something more exciting somewhere else and enhance the experience. So it's partly, we have the money, but we don't want to waste it on something that just because it's glass doesn't mean it's better.
But you're also attracted by the kind of sensuality of the material.
Absolutely. I mean, the way the material bends and moves, and the light is reflected off it as opposed to glass. Absolutely.
You've said that light, air and nature are tremendously important to you. Can you talk about that?
You get it for free. It's part of this bag of cheap tricks that you need. So why throw it away? And if you can capitalize on it, you get incredible beauty. I mean, the case study houses from California, which were a big influence on me. I didn't understand it. Actually, Tom Hines told me that I should, wow, this project we've done looks like something that Gregory Ain had done. And I didn't even know who Gregory Ain was. And when I went and had a look at the work, I realized that these guys were really cool. And they had a way of making the light feel more like light, the air felt more like air, and just was exhilarating to be alive. They were such optimistic humanists in what they were doing, and I really connected with that design philosophy. So that's part of the reason we're interested in green strategies is there's the altruistic one, that it's good for the environment and good culturally for our children and all that kind of stuff, but it's also that it allows you the license to say that I need to show how the light moves through something, that when you shade something you get patterns, when you see the light changes through the time of day, all that you get as a design gift to use. So
I think that comes also from our interest in landscape.
Yeah.
And there's no better. I think that we love to go camping and being outdoors, and that's what you've got out there is lots of light, lots of air, and the shadows are fabulous, and that we like to bring that same sort of quality indoors, but also shadows on a building as pattern making.
How do you, as a wrap up, how do you see the future of your firm, and where is it going? Is it continuing the same areas, or where do you like it to go?
Well, we're moving into public projects, the museum for Pittsburgh, for instance.
Larger projects.
Larger projects, schools, educational, but we're still doing a number of affordable housing projects in the office. We continue doing so.
I don't think we're really looking for in the States more than in other places. The first question people ask you when you're an architect is what kind of buildings do you design? And what they mean by that is it housing, or is it retail? Is it, I don't know, is it office buildings? And you're meant to specialize in a building type, which I don't think is all that healthy. And so we don't really have a building type in mind when we look at it, but I think we're looking for more possibility for invention. We've developed the office in such a way that we want to be able to take more risk. We've never, doing the affordable housing and the cheaper projects, we've never said, let's have an idea first and then work out how to do it. We've always said, I know how to do this, we'll apply that idea to this. And I think do you agree with that? We're trying to move to the thing, well, we have this idea, how do we make this happen? And to try and enrich the bag of tools that we have to do things with. So I think that's why we're so carried away with this children's museum, because we'd never won a competition before. And here we had this idea there that we thought was a good idea, but we hadn't worked it through well enough to work out how the whole thing fitted together. And we get this opportunity of trying to work out how to make something possible, and that's wonderful.